Testing 1, 2, 3.
Sorry?
This is going to be covered in the paper.
Okay.
Who do you want to say you're from?
Montana Association for Civil Rights and Affirmative Action.
Montana
Association for Civil Rights and Affirmative Action.
Can I move this thing over to Mike's side?
Certainly. Do you need
You don't
help?
have to ask permission.
Do you need help? No.
I don't think so.
Hold on, I'm getting there. 3.
McCarthy, we're going to be standing up. Does that matter?
Where are you from? Where are you based? Bozeman.
I guess he's got it turned off now.
Yeah, you know me, but okay. 4.
We're going to stand up.
Sandy.
So is that...
What's your title, Sandy?
just put me down from the
Montana Women's Lobby.
From Helena.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much.
Not necessarily
How are the
order.
roads?
Fine. We came down from Kalispell, though, so.
They're just fine. But I don't know if they're going to be fine going back. It's a pretty...
Thank you. Grecian horses, don't you think?
Yeah, the Grecian horses.
Who's going to be using this tablet?
Probably...
It's going to, Chris, and it's not going to be used very much. So if you,
You won't have to look, you won't have to focus the camera on it.
Really?
no, you won't have to, no. No, it's not part of it,
It's
no.
just sort of housekeeping stuff on it.
Huh. Who else can I talk to?
Are you wanting to stay overnight? Because we're leaving at 5:30 a.m. tomorrow to go to that hearing.
Yeah, I've got arrangements made.
Okay.
Okay.
You got a ride back?
Yeah.
That's okay.
We're being driven around by Scott, that very nice young
That's
man
very
down
nice.
there. And we're in the van and we're just going to get in and get into the zone and he's going to drive. We're going to get back
You're going back tonight? Yeah.
because almost everybody has to be up at the legislature at 8.
Yes, I know. I'll be there. We won't leave till 5:30. It'll be ugly.
She said she was going to morning, so I sent her to you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay and I'll make other arrangements to get back. Yeah.
So you do want to stay?
Well, yeah, my daughter doesn't go to work until 10 since she didn't get off till 7 tonight.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So you're gonna be able to get back by yourself?
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, hitchhike. Good plan. Good idea. Really good idea.
Yeah, there's quite a few more in line, so. Is this you?
This is me.
This is me. So good, I'm glad.
So it
up.
goes.
Yeah, fill it up, that's good.
Let's see what they said here about us. This is in Sunday's
Like, cut
paper.
that
Let's
out.
see.
You're quoted.
The Silt on Basic Rights.
Good, because there's lots of stuff. Good, not the same old.
Is that right?
No.
That's why we did it, so you'd see some different people
I
and
know,
we see some
but you
different.
never know if that's gonna happen. I understand the intent, but the outcome is not always there.
Right.
No, there's definitely lots. A third at least that I do know. A bunch more I don't know.
I do too. So we'll go into the sanctuary.
You didn't utilize genetic services? Oh, I don't have that question.
But that's it.
It's not bad. He quoted me a lot, huh?
Yeah? Yeah, you were the famous person in that one. I made a copy for Christine.
And I'm not a, and I didn't say anything about queer stuff, did I, necessarily? That's good.
You weren't unnecessarily out there about it yet.
Well, no, actually, I wasn't there to promote queer issues. I was out there to promote coalition building.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's good.
Yeah, it is good.
I have been stumbling in certain parts of my presentation here, but oh well.
I'm sure, I've never done it, so if you guys can't do it smoothly after several nights, it's unlikely I'll do mine smoothly.
Really in one night, yeah.
No. Unlikely as it's not going to happen. Plus, I don't think I was given the full. I wasn't.
No, if you go in the back table, there's.
I don't think I was given the full on of what I was supposed to do. Is there an agenda for this evening?
Yeah. It's simple, not passed out, but.
Okay. But I just thought Chris took out something I don't have, which is a short 4 questions. I don't have that.
She can give you a copy.
Okay.
And they're
I have
also
the
on-
long 4 questions. This is what I have. The answers to the questions is what I have.
Oh, you don't want the answer. What you need is, and you don't need those really, because people will provide the questions. What you'll be there is to correct misinformation, especially about reproductive rights and term abortion. That was a hot. Get a copy of those questions from her.
I don't want to open up her stuff.
Or,
You want to open them up?
yeah. She won't like that, but
Are you driving back
There they are.
this is what you want.
Yeah, I don't have one of them.
That's what you want.
And this
Going
is
at 5:30 and
Exactly. Those are your trigger questions.
That's really good.
That's all you need. You're set. It's
I'm
perfect.
set, dang it.
You're perfect.
Well set. Plus, I don't have all the things those guys when they're packs. It doesn't give me any extra packs, so I better not take one.
What do you need? Are you hip to gay and lesbian stuff? It's just civil
Yeah,
rights.
but not even,
right?
I've got you. I've got the gay and lesbian stuff. Nice stuff. I've got that and that and that.
That's it. You got it.
Yeah, so if I have to look, I will. I'm not going to say something correct. Yeah.
And actually, you don't have. And let's see what else. That's it.
Okay.
Tomorrow, are you driving over to Crackadon tomorrow?
Oh, yes.
away.
Do you still
Break
have
away.
room in your car? Because I'm going to announce it if anybody in this room.
No, I'm going tonight.
Oh, you're going tonight. Never mind. But we have room still.
You have room?
Yes.
Oh, okay, that's great. Why don't we?
They're rolling, but nobody wants to sit in these front seats, just like in school. No, those are, you get those. Did you get one of those? No. Nobody's saving them. Nobody is saving them. front chairs.
There's some up front.
All right, take her.
Where have I seen Jonathan before? Jonathan? Yeah. Haven't I seen you before? Haven't I seen you before?
I've seen you on TV before.
Oh, you're kidding. Oh, yes, at the first Pride, wasn't it? Yes. Okay. And David was living there.
Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started? It's a wonderful turnout. Thank you, Missoula. This is our fourth of a series of 4 community conversations, and this probably about doubles our biggest crowd, so this is wonderful. My name is Christine Kaufman. I'm with the Montana Human Rights Network, and up here with me are 3 or 4 other groups represented here who will be resource people for us this evening. Gail Gucci is representing NARAL, Montana NARAL, Sandy Hale Pride, Sandy Oitzinger, the Women's Lobby, and Corky Bush, Montana Association for
Civil Rights and Affirmative Action. I didn't say it was short.
That's right. And we also want to thank our co-sponsors, the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center here in Missoula, the Montana Alliance for Progressive Policy, Women's Voices for the Earth, WORD, Missoula Advocates for Social Justice, the Montana Community Labor Alliance, and the BPW of Montana, Business and Professional Women.
And Missoula Community Access Television.
Thank you. So I want to just talk a little bit about why we're doing this. There are still a couple more chairs if you want to come up front, but it's up to you. You can pull those chairs up back. Some of us here are lobbyists up at the legislature. All of us are with organizations that do lobbying up at the legislature. And partly these meetings grow out of a frustration. We are up there trying to convince people of things that they will never be convinced of. It's pretty frustrating, and it feels like a kind of a waste of resources to spend our time trying to grab people in the hallways and convince them to vote somehow differently than their minds are already made up to vote. We believe that we could be more effective if we were out talking to people and listening to what people have to say and letting you know our perspective on what's going on at the legislature, and also being able to take back your perspective to the legislators up there. There's an attitude up there that really there aren't enough rights to go around. I'm talking here about very basic human rights. And if you give somebody some rights, you have to take them from somewhere, which is really not the way it works, as you all know. That everybody has basic rights, and it's really the role of government to protect those rights for anyone, for everyone, and particularly to keep the majority from trampling on the rights of the minority. We're doing this in the context of the legislature going on, but our sole purpose here is not simply to get you to make a phone call. We hope you do that. We hope you write letters. We hope you make phone calls. We hope you talk to each other, write letters to the editor, and so on. But we're hoping that something bigger can come out of this as well, that this is not just focused on the next 2 months or the hearings coming up later this week, but it's focused on building a progressive vision for Montana. The groups represented here tonight are doing this publicly and together because we feel like we're stronger that way. It's not that we're all going to suddenly start working on each other's issues. That's not what this is about. It's approaching our work with an awareness that our issues are all connected to one another. Gay rights, welfare reform, civil rights for all Montanans, reproductive choice. There's a connections between the attacks that are coming on all those basic rights that we want to acknowledge in these meetings. And if we stay focused on our we don't think of them as narrow issues because they're huge. Each one of them is huge. But if we stay focused just kind of down the path line we're going, we can miss those connections. And if you look at our opponents, the people that are working against us, they're kind of spread across a whole lot of issues. And I think we need to at least have that awareness in the progressive movement, that there are lots of issues out there and they are connected in many ways. If you think of all of these progressive issues that I've mentioned, gay and lesbian rights, civil rights, reproductive choice, economic justice for women, and also think about the other kinds of progressive issues like environmental protection, public education, workers' rights, and those kinds of things. If you can imagine all those things lined up on the top of a wall, and the wall is called democracy. The right wing doesn't really have sharp shooters just trying to pick off one or maybe two of those. They've got a cannon kind of aimed at the middle of the wall, and when it goes down, we're all going to go down together. So that's the kind of connecting thinking that we want to be doing tonight. The right wing really does not have the right answers about much. And I think this presents us with our biggest opportunity, really. If you think about their definitions of family and community and morality, almost all of us are excluded. I mean, we really don't have a place in their picture. If you think about who they think ought to be making decisions about our lives, mostly it's not people like us. So that, I think, gives us a huge opportunity to try to organize all those people that are outside the definition of what the right wing has set out as you know, their definitions of family and community and so on. I think the failure of the progressive movement to connect our issues prevents us from building the strong coalitions and alliances that we need. It prevents us from building a compelling and broad vision of the kind of world we want to live in, a world where all people have access to the decisions and the power and the resources to make the decisions that affect their lives. Coalitions need to thrive in a time of crisis, and I think that time is now. And if we stay divided just because we think we don't have time to work on all these issues, or because of our own internalized racism or sexism or homophobia, or just because of our plain ignorance about other progressive issues and what they mean to us, we're not going to survive the crisis. If the progressive movement is going to survive, I think we have to remake democracy. I think democracies all the time are in that process of remaking themselves. And that kind of evolution is fueled by the inspirations of people who want to be included, the struggles of people who want to be included in democracy in a fuller way. I think we need to take back that language of democracy. We are a pro-democracy movement, and we are working against an anti-democratic agenda. I think also if the progressive movement is to survive, we have to reclaim the language of morality. We seem reluctant to talk about our vision of our convictions that underlie our work for social justice. Excuse me. We believe that every person counts, that every person has dignity, every person deserves respect and equal treatment and justice, and that's a very moral vision. And we need to hold it up that way as a moral vision. I think we'll succeed when we touch not only the minds but the spirits of Montanans. I think it's no accident that a piece of this attack on the basic rights of Montanans is, a piece of it is to defund the arts, or the public funding of the arts. Because it's that kind of thing that speaks to our spirit. And when art is not accessible to all people, and to the great diversity that's in Montana, the whole movement, a whole democratic movement, can suffer because of that. We want to recognize that there are lots of groups that aren't here that would add a lot to this discussion. The environmental movement is not really represented here, although many of us are environmentalists. The workers' rights kind of issues, labor movement, isn't exactly represented here, although many of us and many of you are concerned about those issues. Part of that is just the practicalness, you know. There's only so much you can do in 2 hours, and as you'll find out when you get into your small groups, already there's way too much to do in this 2-hour period. You know, Pride could have called a meeting to talk about gay marriage or gay civil rights, or the network could have called a meeting to talk about affirmative action, or you know, NARAL could have called a meeting. But what we think happens then is basically the people they contact are the people that are already pretty much involved in their organization, pretty much agree with them. So we thought by combining 4 mailing lists, we would get a little bit more mix. And maybe people who haven't normally worked on gay and lesbian civil rights, for example, might come here because of concerns about reproductive choice and be a little bit more educated on a variety of issues. We want this, of course, to be a safe place for people, but we think that we can begin to do some of this cross-issue education. And I'd like to just see a show of hands. I'm going to name kind of the 4 issues represented here. And if you could stick up your hand for the issue perhaps that you most identify with, or the mailing list that you were probably on that you got this mailing from, although you won't know that. But just to get a sense of what issue most likely brought you here. And if you want to put up your hand 2 or 3 times, that's fine too. Maybe some of you feel like you're kind of balanced. But for how many people was sort of civil rights and affirmative action the issue that brought them here? Okay. How about reproductive choice? All right. Women's economic issues. Gay rights. Great. Okay. So we've got a lot of people here interested in a lot of issues. Yeah?
Carrie added everyone, and,
Sure.
and that is actually one of those things I'm talking about law.
Uh-huh.
First Amendment rights.
First Amendment rights.
And there's a coalition here in Missoula called Montanans Against Censorship.
Okay.
Looking at that
That.
redefinition of obscenity bill.
Yes. Thank you. All right. I am going to now turn this over to the resource people here. They are supposed to talk for less than 10 minutes, kind of framing the important issues that they want to bring to your attention. And think of this as sort of fueling your discussions in the small groups, which will happen after 40 minutes, or hopefully a little bit less if people can be shorter. So with that, do you want to go first, Gail?
I don't care.
Okay. Go ahead and reintroduce yourself and give your little spiel.
Okay. Do folks want us to stand? Or?
Yes.
Okay. That means I have to hold all these papers up. I'm Gail Gucci, and I'm the board president of Montana NARAL. And NARAL is National Abortion and Reproductive Rights Action League. And just as a quickie, it's different than Planned Parenthood or Blue Mountain because we're not a service provider. We don't have a clinic. People don't come to us for any kind of services. People come to us for what we do, which is advocacy and education and lobbying and legislative stuff. So it's a statewide organization. And, you know, with choice, with reproductive rights, I mean, we've seen such a steady decline over the last several years. And this is going to be true of other folks in their civil rights as well. But it's kind of interesting because we've had a pro-choice president. We're now in our 2nd cycle of a pro-choice president, and he's fairly helpless at this. He doesn't have a Congress to back him up, and we have state Congresses that are the same. They're not pro-choice. And so I would just like to give a legislative overview, and that way I know I can keep it to 8 minutes. But this 1997 Montana, boy, it does feel back there.
Wish.
Legislature.
Things haven't changed.
Yeah, things haven't changed. Is decidedly anti-choice. And we have anti-choice legislators outnumbering pro-choice legislators about 2 to 1, and in both the Senate and the House. And that's the same makeup we had 2 years ago. I don't know how many of you followed it, but 2 years ago we had 3 really ugly bills come out of that legislative session, all of which went to court and all of which have been overturned. But still, it was a devastating setback for reproductive rights. In addition to our legislature, we have a governor who is also anti-choice and who is actually endorsed by the Right to Life. It is unlikely that any bill, any anti-choice bill that should come across his desk would not be signed by him. So we're looking at a really tough session again this time. And so far, there's actually only been one bill introduced, and this is the big bad, ugly House Bill 365, the so-called partial birth abortion bill. And I say so-called, and it's incorrectly named. It's not a medical term, it's not an accepted term, it's political rhetoric being fueled by a political agenda.
How can you have part of a baby?
It's a good question. So the term we use is late-term abortion, and it's a procedure that they are actually trying to ban the procedure is what this bill's about. And the procedure is called an intact D&E. And it's performed in this whole country about 600 times in a year. It is rarely, rarely used, and is only used in extreme and tragic cases where the life and health of the mother is at risk and or there are severe fetal anomalies. That's it. That's all there is to it. Now, in Montana, as in I think 40 other states, it is already illegal to have an abortion on a viable fetus unless there is a severe health problem for the mother. So there's already law on this. We don't need another law on this. The problem with this bill is that there's no exception for health of the mother, only death of the mother, not health, just death. We think that's a little extreme and too narrow. And so we would not like to see this bill signed into action. In fact, I'm going to throw out that the hearing on this bill is tomorrow at 8 a.m. in Helena. For those of you who'd like to go, we're leaving at 5:30 a.m. and there is room if somebody wanted to come and testify. That'd be great. Talk to me afterwards. We can get you a ride. And or if you're sitting here tonight or during the course of this evening, you would like to write down a little testimony, we can hand in written testimony. So if that occurs to you, please do. A little more about this bill. Besides banning this procedure, it criminalizes this procedure, and it actually has a huge price tag for medical providers, doctors, who are the only folks who can administer this procedure. It's a huge fine, I think $50,000, and is it up to 10 years? Up to 10 years in prison. So it makes abortion a criminal act, and it preys on the tragic situations of women and families who find themselves in this position. And like I said, we're talking 600 in the whole country last year. This is not common procedure. But when a pregnancy goes desperately awry, this is the most often used procedure. It's safe, it's medically approved, it's safer for the woman, and we don't believe that this legislature has any business legislating medical procedures of any sort, not this one or any other one. There's no precedence for this, and they don't have the expertise. I'm not sure, but we were trying to count if there were any doctors in the legislature. I don't think there are, but if there are, there's not many. This is way out of their jurisdiction. This is a decision, extremely private, painful decision to be made by the woman and her healthcare provider. We just think that Montana families and women deserve much better, and they deserve the best, most compassionate health care they can get. And this is often the case with this procedure, that it is the best procedure in this particular instance. There's two other, we can talk about this more and I can take questions, but there's two other bills I want to go over really quickly that have not been introduced but may be introduced. And they're worth noting and they're worth looking for. They don't have numbers because they're not introduced. One is the so-called unborn child abuse bill, and this is a bill that is aimed at women who have addictions to alcohol or drugs. And it is aimed at punishing them for being pregnant and for drinking during that pregnancy or taking drugs. The disturbing part about the bill, there's actually three disturbing parts, I think. It attempts to establish fetal personhood with rights that are the same as the woman. It would likely prevent women who suffer from alcohol or drug addiction from actually seeking information, from seeking help, from perhaps even giving birth in a hospital if they knew they were going to be penalized, criminalized for this. And it sets up a separate set of civil rights for pregnant women, and that is very likely unconstitutional. You can't have a separate set. So that's one. We'll let you know when that one comes up. And the other is a parental rights bill. And this is a very broad sweeping legislation. I don't know if it's passed in other states, but it's certainly been introduced in other states. And it could affect, it's basically, I think, aimed mostly at education, but it gives parents complete sovereignty for their rights of over the rights of their children. So for instance, a child could not perhaps take a sex ed class, could not get counseling on birth control or get an abortion, or they couldn't see their counselor for any other number of reasons. Their parents would have first say, and they would have to go through their parents. But it can also extend beyond that. It could extend to like social workers who wouldn't be able to investigate child abuse, and to teachers who might be challenged on every aspect of their curriculum. It's a very broad sweeping bill. And it's a very dangerous kind of bill. We haven't seen these two up yet, but we expect to see them this session. And I think I'll stop with that.
Just want to mention, if you're inclined to ask questions, that some things may be percolating, try to save them for your small groups. We will come together at the end if you don't feel like you've gotten your questions resolved in the small groups.
I'm Sandy Hale, Executive Director of PRIDE, Montana's statewide civil rights organization for gays, lesbians, and bisexuals. And first, a little bit of history of how we came about. After failed attempts in the 1991 and 1993 state legislature to repeal the deviant sexual conduct statute, one of the most heinous anti-gay laws on the books in the nation, it was felt by many gay, lesbian activists and also our human rights allies, that Montana indeed did need a single public policy voice to advocate and support for the gay, lesbian, and bisexual community. So in May of 1993, our first founding board gathered, and a year later, in March of 1994, they hired moi as their first full-time paid staff person. And some of you know the rest of the story. So we've been in existence for almost 4 years, and some of us didn't think we'd last that long, but here we are, stronger and more visible and prouder than ever. However, we still have a long ways to go. And I would like to go into several areas of the gay and lesbian civil rights movement, because it's played out on several fronts. First, it's played out in the public policy arena, and then it's played out in our everyday lives in the communities that we live. And first of all, I'd like to go into the public policy arena in our movement. Back to what I just mentioned, the deviant sexual conduct statute that is on the books in Montana. It represents the cornerstone of discrimination for our community. It is the key element which separates us from the laws that protect the rest of you. It rendered us second-class citizens, and in some ways denied us our personhood. It says that persons of the same sexual activity and sexual behavior between two persons of the same sex is prohibited, and you can be prosecuted under the law and put in jail and fined a lot of money. Well, that was challenged by 3 lesbians and 3 gay men back in December of 1993. They filed a lawsuit saying that this law violates Montana's Constitution of the right of privacy and also our human dignity and equal protection under the law. It went to court, and in February of 1994, Judge Jeffrey Sherlock, in a district court ruling, said, indeed, this law does violate our right to privacy, and is now being challenged before the Montana Supreme Court, and we hope that we will get a favorable ruling. This particular law has been the major stumbling block in our seeking civil rights, so that we hope that one day that boulder will be removed. The other area that we're fighting for right now is just basic civil rights and some survival things that all of you just take for granted. Right now in Montana, gays, lesbians, and bisexuals are protected from discrimination in employment, housing, education, and access to public accommodations. A lot of you don't realize that. You think we're protected. A lot of gays, lesbians, and bisexuals don't realize that. They think they're protected, unless of course you're one of the people who's lost their job after you've come out. Or if you're one of the people who has been kicked out of their house because you came out to your landlord or landlady. And that indeed does happen in Montana. So that is one of the major civil rights maladies that we would like to overcome. As we have become more visible and organized, we have also experienced serious violent backlashes. And this is another area that we are trying to let all of you know about. Each year, many Montana gay, lesbian, and bisexuals are beat up on the streets, intimidated, and harassed. And this is really serious because our lives depend on this and providing safety for all of our community. Violence motivated by hatred is just not a crime against the individual, it's a crime against the entire community. So when someone commits an act against a gay man or a lesbian because they're perceived as gay or lesbian, it isn't just against that individual, and that indeed is violence, and it's very serious. But if it's committed against us because we're a lesbian or gay man, it's also done as a statement against our community and the fact that we shouldn't be around. And this is wrong, and all of you should be out there stopping it. Some examples of that in Montana, and some of you know about this. In the fall of 1995, 2 gay men were beat up, ambushed on the campus here on the University of Montana. After being identified by an acquaintance of somebody in the assailants group that they were gay men, the assailants rushed out of the bushes and beat them up, and they were taken to the emergency room. At our own Gay Pride in June of 1995, groups of gay men and lesbians were hooted and harassed and actually assaulted as they were returning to their cars. Also here in Missoula, in the fall of 1995, flyers were distributed in several downtown businesses asking for the death of homosexuals and the death to those who support them. And attached to this flyer was a picture of 2 men lynched to death. Now the seriousness of this is this instills absolute fear and terror into the entire gay and lesbian bisexual community. We are not welcome, we don't feel welcome, and unless you speak up against this, we'll never feel welcome and safe in our streets. And we need some laws to kind of accentuate that situation. The serious kind of also application of this is what happens in our public schools. Our youth right now who are thinking about or exploring their own sexual orientation, who have been perceived as gay and lesbian in the public schools, or who know they are gay and lesbian, are often being intimidated, hazed, and sometimes just harassed right out of school. They drop out. This is wrong. And they have right now no place to go for support, no safe zones, no good places to get information about their human sexuality, and we also need to provide that kind of support for our young people. The last big area, hot button I'd like to talk about is gays and lesbians wanting to get married. This is probably an issue that we didn't even want to bring before the nation as a civil rights. It's something that the religious right and political religious extremists have brought as a major issue before we ever wanted it brought before all of you. We wanted to be protected against discrimination on the job first, probably before we were allowed to get married. But since they brought it up, why not? It's a basic civil right. Why shouldn't I be allowed to marry the person I love? Indeed, many same-sex couples are already taking on many of the responsibilities of married couples. In fact, despite taking this responsibility, both economically and emotionally, we're often considered just roommates. We're denied visitation to our partners if they're sick in the hospital. We're denied family health benefits. We're denied some of those tax applications that all of you have. I don't know if they're benefits or not. But basically, we see it as a civil right. And we're not saying that your particular church can say, oh, I don't want to marry you, but we're saying that as a basic civil right between 2 people who love each other, why can't we be validated by the rest of you in a long-term committed relationship? What on earth is wrong with that? I'd like to close by saying that as I said, there's the public arena side of this, but there's also what happens in our communities. The gay, lesbian, and bisexual community needs to come out. They need to start overcoming their own internalized homophobia and come out and shake hands with all of you and say, here I am, I'm your 4th grade teacher. Here I am, I'm your accountant. Here I am, I'm your physician. And at the same time, all of you need to extend your hands and welcome them and say, this is a safe place for you to be. You can work in our schools, gay, lesbians, and bisexuals. You're welcome. You can work in my clinic. So it's a 2-way street. All of you need to come out, and we also need to be welcomed by you. And that's kind of the ultimate movement that needs to happen. Public policy won't allow that to happen. You need to change your own minds and hearts.
Hi, I'm Sandy Oitzinger. I'm with the Montana Women's Lobby, and I'm going to visit with you tonight about women's economic justice, and more specifically about punitive welfare reform. And I wanted to recognize Raquel Castellanos in the audience, who is with Working for Economic Equality and Liberation, which is an elegant name. And she's going to help me out if I get into any difficulty up here. So to start, I want to ask you, how many of you have ever been in a grocery checkout line where food stamps were being used? Everybody in the line is looking at that basket, right? Why? Why? Because food stamp eligible people are visible in our community, and because at every level of the public relations arena, we're being told that we need to worry about this. Now, I want to tell you a companion story. In Helena, a couple of years ago, I was quite surprised, as many people were, to discover that there is a Superfund site in Helena. It's near a ball field, near a railroad track. And in fact, upon the discovery of that site, a railroad, which would have been very likely to end up paying for the cleanup of that Superfund site under existing Superfund law, came forward and volunteered to clean it up. And this was a big community to do, and we had reporters and health department officials and the little town meeting, and you know, the railroad lawyer was polishing his lapels, and you know, we were all recognizing what wonderful neighbors and corporate citizens we had with us. And before the ink had dried on that agreement, the attorney for the railroad, during the legislative session of 1995, was in a conference committee in the very last hours of the legislature, getting introduced an amendment which would reimburse volunteer corporate good citizens who clean up Superfund sites. And they were already on the list. So nobody is looking in that lawyer's basket, though. Nobody's looking in his basket. So, to close, I want to tell you that there is a fallacy brewing in Helena at the Capitol, and that is that you can shortchange welfare programs and shrink welfare roles. And you know, that somehow or other this is not going to be punitive. And it's a fallacy, particularly when we think of it in terms of the painful scarcity of employment in the state of Montana. So I'm really looking forward to visiting with you tonight in our small gatherings so that we can try to frame these issues in a way in Montana that will result in economic justice for all. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Corky Bush, and I am representing that long-titled Montana Association for Civil Rights and Affirmative Action. I also make my living as the Affirmative Action Officer at Montana State University in Bozeman, and I'm very pleased to be here tonight. And I want to try to accomplish a couple of things tonight. Specifically, I want to refer you to a petition that's coming around somewhere. I think Amy has it, and she's going to start it around, which is pretty self-explanatory, and I'll explain a little more. But it's basically petitioning the legislature to not to pass House Bill 303, which, among other really pretty evil things, will do the most evil thing, which is to remove Indian fee waivers from funding by the legislature. I
I want to try to explain some of the context in which equal opportunity and affirmative action legislation and guidelines operate in the United States. And the first thing that's important to realize, and Sandy has alluded to this, is that the basic civil rights structure of the United States does not cover everything. In fact, it only covers 13 of what would be an infinite number of attributes of people. And I'm going to tell you what they are. They're race, color, national origin, sex, marital status, parental status, age, disability, religion, creed, political organization or political belief, status as a Vietnam era veteran, and status as a veteran with disabilities. Now think about yourself, and even though the good news about that list is that everybody appears on that list in one regard or another. I mean, everybody has sex. I mean, I'm sorry. No, I misspoke. Everybody is asex. I guess that's what I need to say. And by being asex, everyone is covered by protection, protected from discrimination on the basis of sex, whether you're male or female. Everybody has a race, even though people who are Caucasian American don't normally think of themselves as having a race. Everyone has a race. So everyone appears on this list in some way or another. But the list certainly doesn't cover every attribute of a person's life or characteristics. And among the attributes that are currently controversial, that are specifically not covered by discrimination law, in other words, specifically not covered by federal discrimination law, they are citizenship, much under attack, and recently the protections on the basis of citizenship have been greatly reduced, multiracial heritage, language. You can discriminate against someone on the basis of their speaking Ebonics, and it looks like we're doing a really good job. Sexual orientation, sexual preference, transsexuality, reproductive status, which means if you happen to be of childbearing age, if you happen to be menopausal, it's perfectly legal to discriminate against someone because they're menopausal, or to discriminate against someone because they're fertile and transfer them out of a job in a chemical area and because you don't want to deal with any wrongful death suits. And that discrimination is found to be legal. Body morphology, it's perfectly legal to discriminate against someone because they're obese, because they're tall, because they're short, because they've got gray hair, because they're bald. This general category of body morphology, it's perfectly legal to discriminate against someone on those bases. On the basis of membership in the Communist Party, specific exclusions from the political organization, and it's perfectly legitimate to discriminate against people on the basis of socioeconomic class. So the first thing to remember is that not every characteristic upon which people are discriminated are protected from that discrimination. And that we, in fact, have a long way to go in our society to look at the patterns and practices of discrimination and construct legal bars and prohibitions to that. Okay, so that's the first thing to know. Not everything is currently protected from discrimination. The second thing to know is that affirmative action takes only the tiniest slice of those protections from discrimination. And affirmative action specifically protects minorities, women, persons with disabilities, Vietnam era veterans, and veterans with disabilities. Only those 5 groups have what are called affirmative action protections, or must have, federal contractors must guarantee that they don't discriminate on those particular bases. Third myth about affirmative action: everyone would have you believe that affirmative action covers everybody, and it's a terrible burden that every employer must support, must endure. The fact is that only federal contractors are required to meet affirmative action requirements. In Montana, I'm going to say this slowly, only federal contractors are required to implement and meet affirmative action guidelines and requirements. This is a very small percentage of Montana employers to begin with, a small percentage of Missoula area employers. It covers federal contractors, large industries that do business with the federal government, colleges and universities, banks, you can understand, construction companies that have federal contracts. That's pretty much it in Montana. That's the narrow slice of affirmative action eligible or affirmative action requirements in Montana. There is no state-based affirmative action. There are no state requirements similar to federal requirements that affect all Montana employers in any way whatsoever. California, which is the state that had the most articulated state-based affirmative action programs, did have state-based affirmative action, and even then those only applied to state contracts. In other words, colleges, universities, community colleges, businesses doing business with the state government. So affirmative action is in many ways constructed as a mythological target. This is something that you're supposed to attack because you're supposed to believe that the heavy hand of affirmative action is applied upon everyone. In fact, it's a very small number of employers. So having said that, I want to talk to you about the larger context of affirmative action. And any of you know me may know that I really don't like cliches and common analogies. So I am going to use one nonetheless, because the first thing, I used to hate this level playing field analogy that you hear all the time, and I really rejected it. But I've been doing a lot of thinking about it, and I think we need to think more strategically about that particular analogy. And to try to explain the large context of affirmative action, I'm going to be talking about, and in terms of that analogy. And what I want you to do is I want you to imagine that you have just bought some property in the Bitterroot, in the forested areas of the Bitterroot. Unfortunately, when you saw the advertisement that the realtors put in the paper for this large piece of property, it was a wonderful sounding ad. You know, beautiful place, lovely trees, well landscaped, lovely stream running through it, everything else. You just thought it was wonderful, and you even looked at some aerial photos of the property, and you were convinced that you wanted to buy this. And your purpose is not to build another humongous house in the Bitterroot up on the mountains, but to level the land and put in a playing field for the American economy game. You want to, you're decided that the NBA can go, hey, you want to play the American economy game on your property. Well, finally snow melt comes in September or October, and so you finally get on your property. You get on your property and you start walking it out, and guess what? You tumble into a pit. And you look around, and there are all kinds of pits and ditches and depressions on this property that are, some are big and some are narrow, some are deep and some are shallow, but the whole property is covered over with pits. And there are mounds everywhere. There are mounds, pits, and mounds, and you're going, my heavens, how am I going to play the American economy game on this playing field? And so you complain to the real estate agent who says, well, it's perfectly beautiful. This property has actually been, 350 years in the making, and we think it's absolutely lovely property, and you're really, really fortunate to own it. So you say, oh, well, okay, and the real estate agent goes away, and you decide, well, it's still not a level enough playing field to play the American economy game on. So I'm going to call in some contractors and see what they can do for me. So you dial up a contractor, and the contractor comes, walks out the property with you, and says, my gosh, this is beautiful property. What nice level property, what beautiful vistas. This is terrific property. The only problem I see with this property is the problem of that nasty erosion, wind and water. I can see it's dribbling some of the land from the mounds into the pits. And so to help you, I'm going to construct a giant tent over your property, and we're going to put flashing lights on it and say, home of the American economy game, levelest playing field in the world, y'all come. And this will be great property because we'll prevent the erosion that's sort of creating a little problem in the bottom of these pits. well, you take one look at this contract and you think, this person is really kind of out there. I don't understand. So you say you'll call him, not to call you, and you call the second contractor. Second contractor comes on your property and says, you have kind of a pit problem here. And you say, oh, thank heaven somebody realizes there's a problem with the pits on this property. You say, oh, gee, please do something about it. What do you think you can do? And he says, well, I think this problem's going to take care of itself. We'll just make sure we stop digging pits. Right? If we stop digging the pits, then eventually erosion, you can see little pockets of deposition here. Eventually, if we stop digging pits, the erosion, the wind, and the water will fill in these pits, and you'll be able to play the American economy game on a wonderfully level playing field. You think, okay, well, that's certainly better than building a tent, but maybe it's not going to accomplish the purpose. I kind of wanted to play the American economy game in the lifetime of my great-grandchildren. And at the given rates of deposition and erosion in the Bitterroot Valley, it's probably going to take another 350 years. So you dismiss that contractor and you call somebody else. The third contractor comes on the property and says, you have a little bit of a pit problem here, don't you? You think, yeah. And he says, I've got just the thing. I got some Army surplus soup ladles. And my idea is that everybody who comes on your property, who works for the federal government or has any relationship to the federal government as a contractor or something, we'll give them a ladle. And we'll ask them to carry in a ladle full of dirt and dump it in the pits. Well, you think, well, that's certainly better than building a tent, and it's somewhat better than the natural process of erosion, but it doesn't really seem like it's going to do very much very soon. So there you're left with trying to figure out what to do with your property so that you can level the playing field for the American economy game. My analogy tells you the three major philosophical orientations to the 350-year history of discrimination and inequality that has characterized this country. One, the first contractor, is to say, looks level to me. You can't see it's level, I can see it's level, looks level to me. Any problems you might have are clearly created by nature and the meritocracy, so don't worry. The second view, which is the non-discrimination view, is the dominant way this problem is approached in the whole country, which is to just stop doing something bad. Stop discriminating and wait for the natural processes of education and the economy to fill in the pits. The third approach is the soup ladle approach, to, in very narrow, limited instances, ask people to do a little filling in of the pits. That's the affirmative action approach. It seems to me that all of these still raise the question, how do we level the playing field of the American economy? What is it that the state of Montana and the United States should be doing to level off this playing field? Now, clearly, the first thing you need to do is oppose the constitutional amendment 299, which would prohibit, it would ban Montana from implementing any state-based affirmative action. Since we don't currently have state-based affirmative action, this seems to me that you can call this the condom amendment. It's a prophylactic to prevent us from ever giving preferences if we would ever have this idea to begin with. And we're going to send a message, I don't know whom, a message to the future that, even though Montana has steadfastly resisted handing out any soup ladles till now, we're going to continue to resist handing out soup ladles. So I would hope you'll defeat that. You'll move to defeat that. And 303, which to my mind has gone through the Montana Code and has identified any place the word American Indian, Native American, or minority, or women, or sex, or minority has appeared, and has deleted and struck it, which is what's going to take out Indian fee waivers if we left it in. But while you do that, I want you to think about this larger question, which is what does a state, what is our responsibility as individuals to eliminate the negative, pernicious, and lasting effects of discrimination in our society? Thank you.
In just a few moments, we're going to break up into some smaller groups, and we'll try to do that as easily as we can. But briefly before we do that, I'm going to go through some general guidelines, and I'm going to go through pretty quick the ground rules for small groups. These will not be new to you. We ask you to
Can I ask
please.
a question?
Yeah.
I don't want to throw a monkey wrench in your agenda, but I really feel that many of us have questions for most of the speakers, and that there's something to be said for a general discussion.
There are
from the-
certainly
from the
things to
group.
be,
I think,
to be said for a general discussion, but with this many people, we feel like people won't have the freedom to talk, and we will come back together at the end, and if you feel like your questions and your concerns haven't been answered, unless anybody else thinks we should deviate from the structure here, I think.
Well, I think we've worked real hard to get acquainted with each other's issues and to try to deal with them in our small groups. So I think we should, if we can, go forward.
I think we'll go forward and we'll stay in the groups probably about 45 to 50 minutes, and then we'll come back together. We ask that you respect each other's viewpoint, only talk one person at a time, allow each individual time to speak, and speak from where you are, from where your real position is. Listen to the dialogue and try to move it along to the place that it's going, rather than sort of replaying things in your head that you wanted to say a few minutes ago and trying to make them fit. I think this is a skill we need to all kind of work at, is sort of moving the conversation forward. And once again, speak the truth from your point of view and from where you are. We expect there to be some differing opinions on these issues, and we hope that there can be some dialogue about that. The main question that we want the groups to work on is what connects these issues? What do all these issues have to do with each other? And how can we frame the issues in a way that's going to sort of capture the passions of Montanans and move people to action? That's really where we want to get to in these small groups. And feel free to talk about any or all of these issues. We're going to have resource people in your group. If you feel at the end that your questions haven't been dealt with in terms of information as adequately as you would like, then please gather back here and we can do some of that work at the end. There's also a lot of resource sheets. I realize some of you probably sat in chairs that didn't have those. We planned for about 45 people, and we have more than that. But there are some sheets on that table back there that will give you a lot of information as well. To divide into groups and try to stay focused here for a little while before you start moving around. We're going to do 4 groups in this room. There's one was set up in the back. I'm sure the chairs have been moved. But if your birthday is in January or February, we'll just divide by month. You will go to the back corner back there. And please don't move until we got this all set up. If your birthday is in the next 2 months, March and April, we're going to set up a group right there in that corner. May and June will be over in that corner right there under the little green sign. March, April, May, June. July and August will be kind of in a circular area right up here, maybe sort of around this table.
Move the table.
Yeah, we can move the table back a little bit. The next 2 months,
September, October.
September and October, we'll meet out just down these steps in the foyer, and there'll be a little circle set up there. And then the final, November and December, will be in the back of the sanctuary. And again, there's a pew there, and we'll do a semicircle around it, and I think that we can make this work. We'll try to end at about 10 to 9 or so, and then we'll come back together. So move as quickly as you can into the groups.
And where do you want to tell us when we're done? God's gonna come around again.
Okay.
Oh, no.
It'd be good.
You usually go to January, February?
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to December, November. Where are you going?
May and June.
June is over there.
May and June, July, August.
Where was that? Sorry.
Right here.
This one? Oh, yeah. Thank you. I'm like, oh, I don't know where that was.
Are we doing it right here?
Yeah. I think we can leave this table up unless people don't want it up. But I actually like the table up. Look at this. This could be weird. We have 3 of us, huh? Oh. Could it be that unequal in the birthdays? Hi. All right.
Well, there's different ones. Most of it is just rigidity. There is no that's the more liberal one. Even like co-workers and they're involved in creating new schools and everything, the whole thing. And a lot of people in that church do. Some see Paul's
Guess there's no other birthdays in our month.
very open-minded. How about you? Where do you go back to? Ethan.
Spirituality, I guess. Nothing more than that.
I used to work with cloud neighborhood meetings. Do you pastors and Leos in a group?
What's that?
Pastors and Leos in a group? And they're trying to get that. We are?
Share the one critical organization that my name is Court. Don't elaborate on tell me what you're interested in.
I have a son who happens to be gay, and I'm with scriptural and family franchise families. We run nationally throughout the state. And I'm also with a very tiny community that works in Monroe County and San Jose. And it just local things.
Board member of the Montana Human Rights Network and member of the Missoula Advocates for Social Justice.
Gosh, I don't recognize the name anyway. My name is Liz Gupton. I work for the Forest Service in Superior, and I met Courtney just a week ago. Although I'd seen a lot of the things that she's been doing at St. Regis, which I always thought was fairly courageous, and bringing speakers in from foreign parts. Anything else out of St. Regis is a foreign place. So, unfortunately, I haven't been able to attend these meetings, but I'd like to at some point. And of course, you told me about the meeting here tonight, so I wanted to come and support all the different parts of our lives, civil rights, reproductive rights.
My name is Dave Parker. I'm actually a Missoula expatriate, moved over to Helena. this, the kind of discussion that was interesting to me, I just started working for the Montana Alliance for Progressive Policy, and kind of the stuff that we're trying to do there is bring a lot of diverse organizations like labor and environmentalists, and in fact, I think everyone except for Corky Bush that was on the panel is on my board of directors. So we're trying to bring these groups together and talk about the progressive movement in a larger context than just single issues, like just labor issues or just environmental issues, how we can all work together and how they affect us. So looking forward to the discussion.
I'm Kay Sylvester from Stevensville, and I'm a member of the Montana Human Rights Alliance.
And I'm Shirley Smith, new to Missoula, having been here only a couple of years. And I'm here as an interested and concerned citizen. It's about the same with me. I'm Tammy Renfro. I'm from our league. And I just barely heard about this meeting. I admired Ken Toole's work and decided to kind of see what was going on.
My name's Ami Thurber, and I work at the Women's Center on campus, and I'm a former board member of the Lambda Alliance on campus. And I'm also a Lesbian Avenger community, a newly founded community organization.
Well, thanks. It's really interesting to me to see that we are diverse and that some of us maybe have been working in these issues and others were drawn to come to the meeting. One of my big concerns as an activist, especially for low-income women, is how can I appeal to people who might be sitting at home and have the values that I think are significant values of tolerance and equality. How can I appeal to people to get involved? And I think that's part of the question that we're being asked to consider first. The way they have the question framed here is, what do all these issues have to do with each other? And then how can we frame the issues in a way that draws people to come together, that is passionate and pulls people into the process. I think one of our greatest challenges is to move out of the bystander status that we're socialized, I think, to play, just kind of a bystander, and to move into the process, to find our voice, to make sure our views are heard. So this is a big question. How do we do that? What do you see that all of these issues have in common? And if you were going to design, I guess, a plan for bringing people, the majority, I believe, who are out there together to make their voices heard, what would your plan look like? And I'll just leave it open. Anybody can jump in.
Whatever you want to call it, those issues are all, these issues are on your map. And the canon analysis.
Well, what about, what is it that you see as a common ground on all the issues?
I'll give you a short quote. Chief Seattle said, everything is connected.
Okay, that's a good place to start.
One of the things I know we talk about, but I came tonight for some answers, is the fact that we're all human beings, and we're all people, and we are coming from the same thing, not, maybe not in our minds, not the same place, but we are all people, and how to get those barriers down, why we have to show the differences in us, I don't know. That's the common thing that we try to use.
I think maybe part of appealing to people who may be sympathetic to one of these causes but not to all of them is just to focus on the basic human rights issue, the basic making the government leave the individual alone. That's one thing every issue has in common.
I think it is a really good idea to bring people of diverse religious beliefs or different issues, and get so single issue focused. If we're an environmentalist, this is the only issue that we can champion, but then they started, the environmentalists that I've been familiar with, you get into the issues of, okay, so they're going to cite a radioactive waste dump in the core
maybe a Mexican neighborhood or something. And the reason they do that is because those people don't have money, they don't have strength to combat it like a rich white neighborhood would. So you see that your environmental issues and your human rights issues are like she said, they're all connected. And strength in numbers. You know, if you try and single issue everything, you divide and conquer. But how do you get people to come out of their living rooms and do something? That's a really big issue.
Yeah, it is. What about other comments on the common ground? What do all of the issues that we've mentioned tonight have in common? Any other thoughts?
I think there's a kind of a logic of oppression is how I talk about it. That there's this logic that can apply to all these different issues that privileges a certain group over another group, that privileges people who speak English or who are straight or who are able-bodied, and sets up barriers for people who are other than that. And I think that I see that happening on many, many different levels all through our culture, and the different barriers are different that different people face, down to their specific person, not even their membership to a particular group, but they're just all the differences and the barriers look different, but the logic I think is similar in all those cases. And I think that when you start really mapping out where all of those systems exist, where all those in all the cases that we privilege certain groups and set up barriers for other, we can see how everybody has somebody in their family who is queer or who has been put in jail or who is, living under the poverty level, or who is, married someone of another race or religion. We have everybody's family. We are affected and touched by that logic. And so I think if we start looking at it like that, I think people can start to see connections that way, possibly. But
appeal to the familiar that is in their family.
Feel the what?
The familiar.
Okay, I just wanted to comment on something that I think you were pointing out, that we have a history of privileging, and then if you're in this privileged group, it means you're safe from some attack that's being perpetrated against this other group. And what I guess I come at the issue or the question about what do all these issues have in common from a slightly different angle, but it touches on what you were saying in that I think all of these issues are the attempts of the discriminated groups or the less privileged groups to move out of that place and to argue for equality. And so these are attacks on all of those efforts to really to liberate our society and to change the way we've historically done things. Did you want to add something?
Can the cameraman please? My birthday's in March, and I am a volunteer. Two things, because I've been listening to everybody. I think that one of the things that I feel among many kinds of discrimination, but that doesn't come up tonight, but that we're all aware of, and I think that sometimes we forget it, is political discrimination. In other words, I think I'm a fairly qualified writer and television producer, but I am unemployable in Missoula and in Montana, basically, because I'm an advocacy journalist, as the way they like to put me down as, right? But I don't want to quantify it with me. I'm just saying we forget that, we are also biased against when we have a politic. I mean, you're not, because it isn't a church, or it isn't this, or it isn't that. No, you're not quite as good as the next person because you don't know how to be nice. And why are we always meeting? And why are we always complaining about this and that and the other thing? So I think we need to remember that overarching in America, a political critique. I feel blackballed. other words, in the true 50 sense of the word in employment. And I think that that is important for reason number two, and it's an old song with one which Danette has heard me sing and others of you, but somebody said, a few of you said, well, what about people sitting at home that are, maybe would like to hear, what we're saying or what our thoughts are, or they can't get out or whatever. And that's why I put my politics into the media and stuff like that. Because I believe that Americans, for many good reasons, do not believe that we really do or are supposed to own public broadcasting. That's why it's called public broadcasting, when in fact we don't. Valley County's got a pretty good low-power state. In other words, we have to assume more authority and ownership over those things that are ours. The TV stations, the radio stations, they are licensed to operate in the public interest. If you don't know that, and if you don't believe it, then you don't have the strength to go in and instead of willy-nilly and say, can you put on our public service announcement, please, that you want time. Because you own those facilities, they are licensed in your, and my last analogy is one, whether you go to Africa in your history or Latin America in your history, is that when the dictator is under threat, the first place they send the army is not the troops in the field, but to the broadcasting facilities to protect his chief weapon, which is the power of information. And I use that analogy because I think we should apply it to ourselves and assume that greater responsibilities to say we're here and you just show up. Anyway, it's not an easy job, but that's my speed. Thank you.
I'll try a kind of broad, abstract way to get at the issue of what unites us for me. And that is that you can't have freedom in this country without a substantial measure of equality. And by that I don't mean equality of opportunity, which is the axiom of conservatives and extreme individualists who say that we are all equal because we all have equal opportunity. I would contend that you don't have equal opportunity until you have a substantial measure of equality of result. That the playing field isn't level, and it's not going to be made level simply by saying that we have equality of opportunity or that we have freedom. If you're, as President Johnson used the metaphor of the race as opposed to the level playing field, that some people, we're all in a 100-yard race, but some people start out 30 yards in front of others. Some people start out 40. Well, who are these people that start out ahead of others? Well, they may be white, they may be men, they may be rich, they may be straight. And to me, the greatest measure of inequality in our society, taken as a whole, not for separate niches, but the greatest measure of inequality is economic inequality. And that has been, of course, growing by leaps and bounds over the last 20 years, but it's always been substantially true. We're the most unequal society of the major Western industrial states. We have the highest percentage of people at the bottom, the highest percentage of people at the top. We have the greatest disparity in wealth. And these people say that you can't be wealthy unless you're free. I'm saying you can't be free unless you have a substantial equality of the means to make you free. Freedom for the, who was it, Liebling said that we have a free press for those who can afford it. The people really who can get their message on TV, who can go in and advertise, who can control the media. We talk about public control over the airwaves, but we know in fact that they're not. So for me, what makes me passionate and what I see as uniting people is equality. All across the board, but fundamental economic equality. And there are many in the progressive movement who have fought hard for the rights of women or for the rights of gays and lesbians, for blacks, for the environment. But who may not believe in the large measure of economic equality. They may believe that I want to be a woman who runs the corporation and gets the right to run people down who are below, or the examples will multiply. And so I think that that's what can be the biggest measure of unification in our society. But it's also the hardest because we're an extremely individualistic society. And we've had a capitalist culture from the very beginning that has been little challenge on fundamental grounds.
Well, you've touched on a taboo subject, I think. You know, we hear the economic index.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but can we get the gentleman behind you
I
there?
didn't realize there was somebody back there enjoying it. Okay. One thing that really bothers me is that when we hear on the news every single night, or 3 times a day, depending on how often you listen to it, the indicators of our economic health, that we always hear, you know, how the stock market's doing, the economy's growing as if we're all one big happy family sharing equally in that growth. So I think, you know, that's such a taboo subject, what you just mentioned, and how do we break into that discussion? How do we break into that and bring that message to people? You can't even talk about welfare and poverty without people feeling like you're provoking a class war. You're really touching on a taboo subject. Anyway, that's maybe we're getting off track a little bit here, but something I feel really strong about.
I think Ralph touched on something that I've been working on, trying to figure out why, as a progressive movement, we're so fractured and divided. While it appears on the right, folks are they're united on a very basic level. It seems to me that we're more apt to be divided on specific issues. For example, if we're a progressive movement, some folks in the progressive movement may be opposed to abortion, or in our organization we deal with we've got labor organizations and environmental groups. There's at some level there's going to be a conflict there in terms of what we're looking at, but it seems to me we need to focus on basic values. We all have a shared shared set of basic values. Equality, certainly one of them. We can debate all day how to reform welfare or how to deal with welfare. But on a very basic level, we all have a common belief in some sense that we need to take care of folks, or give them a leg up, or whatever the newest jargon is. Our message, I think, could resonate a lot more if we dealt on a values level, what our basic values as progressives are, as opposed to single, narrow issues. And one of the things Ralph talked about, the 100-yard dash, and some folks starting at the 30-yard line, or whatever. It reminded me of something that I heard one time that was funny. They were talking about George Bush, and they said that George Bush was born on third base and thought he had triple.
Good point.
Well, what do other people think about this idea of focusing on values? I mean, my own, I'll just briefly say, I have this weird reaction to that word anymore. Value. So, but I'm interested in hearing people's responses. Does that seem like a place to find common ground, to bring in diverse people to impact these issues?
Why do you react that way to it?
I guess I'm just, yeah, it's a good question. Because the right has used it so much, it worries me that we're going to get into some discussion and find that maybe we don't have the same values.
Well, I think basically we do.
I think that's true, because we have to have a definition of values. The religious right has one definition of values, and the religious left has a different set of values than that. And at this point, it appears religious rights set of values is better than the religious left set of values.
In what way?
Like more successful, better?
Well, they're hollering louder than that.
Okay, louder.
They're better at disseminating it than we are.
So it is as if the left doesn't have
The left
a
is,
set
the
of
left
common values.
is the left because they're quote liberals has a greater range of what we look at as values, and certainly a wider circle of what we include because as I see it with the religious rights, their set of values is very narrow, and everybody has to conform to that set of values in order to have values. Does that make any sense at all?
What about other comments about the values?
Well, I was hearing us.
You say, I'm not, sorry I'm late, but as you talk about values, would it not, if you want to emphasize values, rather than using the term values, be very specific and say we want to emphasize this and that, without even referring to them. And then I think, as we emphasize, for instance, redistribution of wealth, I would want to ask the question, how in the world is that possible? Or are we just kind of talking about a general need that exists, but we all know that will never happen? Or is there some way that we can deal with a specific value specifically? You know, is there a way that we can say, we see this need and this is what we can do to respond appropriately to that need?
Well, I'm just going to take my authority as a facilitator and move us into a slightly different direction and ask you, because I'm imagining how wonderful it would feel to go into the Montana legislature with a progressive agenda instead of going in as I do, dreading it, every few years to simply respond to their agenda. So keeping in mind our discussion about values and the other things we've mentioned, what would that agenda look like? And I'm taking off where you were with your comment about being specific. What do we want? And try to bring it down to what's possible in Montana. I wouldn't want to limit us to what's possible today in Montana with our current legislature, but that's not a whole lot. But, you know, just given who we are as people living in this particular place, in this particular economy, what kinds of things would you put on that agenda?
It's hard to define how to get there, but that's
One that comes to my mind very quickly is alternatives to sentencing. And for a community to really give that some thought, especially to juveniles and first-time offenders, alternatives to traditional sentencing, to get away from just this concept that everyone who does something against the law is put into prison.
What's one of your alternatives?
I'm not prepared to answer that question. I think those answers need to evolve in the community.
I guess I can, just to take a step further, I can see that where particularly juveniles or, you know, kids that are into vandalism, they get to go and fix whatever the vandalism is that they
Something
created.
construction.
Repair things, be more constructive and build instead of tearing things down. So community service is an obvious one.
What about other, and I'm just going to ask us to be kind of broad without getting into the details, but other things that you think would be part of a progressive agenda that we could bring to the legislature? And I'm always trying to look to the next time because they'll be back.
Could you elaborate a little bit more about what you're...
Well, I'll give you an example. Some of us met and came up with the women's economic calling it the Women's Economic Blueprint Web, and they changed the name on me, so I don't know what it is at this point. But basically, coming together and talking about what kinds of things could we propose during this session to improve the economic opportunities in our state for women. And one of those had to do with, well, it was a spectrum of things, ranging from ensuring that there's enough child care for welfare recipients who are forced into the low-wage labor market, to what kinds of things can we do that are really innovative, that create livable wage, higher wage jobs for women in our economy. But it didn't go beyond that into bill drafts and really creating possible legislation. But that was a start. So those are the sorts of things I'm thinking about. Could include gay rights bills. In fact, I wanted to ask Sandy, there is a pretty, I think, okay gay rights bill that's pending, but that sort of thing.
Well, I'd like to respond in this way positively, in the sense of, yes, it always seems like we're going up to Helen and dreading it to react to somebody else's proposal or agenda. And then you walk into the room, which is crowded with 1 million people, you don't get a chance to say your speak, so even structurally it's bad, for ordinary citizens to come in there and speak. You don't have the big pin on your blue suit. But an agenda, in other words, like I describe this legislature and others as a poverty of the imagination. And so I agree with this idea of agenda, that we do need to come forward and say, we all have our particular little things that we love and want to go for, but I look at all this talk about the state forests and the national forests and whatever. I need a place to live. A lot of people I know need places to live. Well, so what about if I come in with an agenda to Helena that says, we want X board feet of the state forest land so that we can build houses for people in this state and put people to work. We're selling off our own state forests anyway. So that's what I need. In other words, I think we have to bowl the right wing over and bowl those folks over with our own imaginations, which are precious and wonderful.
So economic agenda items are probably right on the top of most everyone's list.
But I do mean that sense of excitement that we do. How did Gingrich get away with this, the 100,000 million point contract or whatever? But the idea of presenting, this is what we view and this is what we want. We won't get all of it, but I think you have to come in like gangbusters and say, we're here.
I wonder if one way, I don't know how versed we all are in recent history, but one thing we might ask ourselves that would be useful in answering the question of what can give us excitement is to ask, how did conservatism become such an overwhelming tide over the last 3 decades? Why did the progressive movement, which was strong in the 1930s, 40s, and even into the 50s and 60s, lose its way? What was it that produced? Well, I taught history for 30 years, so I'm not too enamored of just a cyclical pendulum swinging. I think things cause pendulums to swing. So I would sort of challenge us to ask ourselves, where did the left or the progressive movement or liberalism go wrong? And I can throw out a few answers. I've been thinking about the question.
Please do. We've got plenty of questions. Let's get some answers.
All right. Well, one of the things that seems to me that has happened to the left since the 1960s, now 2 or 3 things that have happened, and I was part of the left and have been for decades, is one thing I think we did was to alienate a lot of white working class men, especially white patriotic working class men, with an agenda that was not couched in terms of we love America. During the Vietnam War, there was a lot of criticism of the country based upon its policies, which I participated in, and so we turned away some of those people. We also went into an identity politics mode, if you will, promoting in our society, from minorities to women to gays and lesbians to the disabled. And I think in the process we sort of lost touch with working class people, not just white men, but working class people. We lost some of those economic issues as we were emphasizing more cultural and social issues and environmental issues too. And the conservatives have been able to picture the left as an elitist group, which is the farthest thing, I think, from where the left is, but picture us as elitists and let these fat cats in the corporate boardrooms get off scot-free. These people that are making all the money and exercising the power, they seem to be in favor of democracy and equality and opportunity. They're rescuing these people in Montana and Georgia and California from us elitists. Why do we represent the elite? Well, we represent the students, the pointy-headed intellectuals, the feminists, the gays and lesbians, the blacks, all of these. And where are the vast majority of people out there? They're being ignored by us. Now that's the vision that's been painted of us. And it resonates enough that it brings a lot of people. Similarly with religion, they're talking about fundamental values. So many of us are agnostics, atheists, or we're in these liberal churches that are supporting these various groups, and we're not in touch with the mainstream, the hard rock people. I think that's kind of my shorthand interpretation of how conservatism came on strong in the last 2 or 3 decades. They've also put aside a lot of their differences, as somebody has said, and we've let ours sort of divide us. Or we've gone off in our own ways and we say, well, I'll work with you on your project, you work with me, but we don't have a vision, a passion, a value that brings us together. And I think it has to do with economic equality, with democracy, and insisting upon the ties between equality and freedom.
You know, I think
That's where you would start, is with the economic equality.
it does seem like a conservative, like the church has fractured just as much as, you said the left seems to have fractured quite a bit. We've let our differences pull us apart, but it does seem like the church has fractured off into the Christian right, which is just so loud that we hear it as an overwhelming voice for the church, which is not true. It's interesting to remember, you said the religious right and the religious left. There is a religious left. There are quite a few people in the church who do support a little more lenient agenda than the conservative right. And so they are just as fractured as just that one small group, the Christian right, that has spoken up and been heard. And maybe we may be fractured, but if we could get a louder voice, even for part of the agenda, it's going to make a difference. It will be heard.
One of the things that I've seen is that there's a lack of leadership on the conservative side, as far as I'm concerned. People want to be led, and we've seen so many folks follow very, very easily. If there's a voice to follow, and especially if we're talking on the religious part of it, if they're using something which would be their interpretation of the Bible or something, they have this thing to follow. And on the other side of it, none of us follow very well, and so we've always got everything muddled together, and we have 1,000 things. It's true. Even the people that say, "Oh, I could never lead," end up leaders because they have these individual, independent thoughts, and they want to go ahead and do something in these intense feelings, and they're not real good followers. So we can't ever seem to get real
one
common thing, one focus, or one set of values, or whatever it may be. We can't seem to do it. But I don't know how to bridge that, because we have found in our own area, just from what we've done, there are people there that are, like the folks that have not been able to go along with the left for years and years, but they really don't have anywhere. And if we verbalize, if we're there, and if we're
visible. It's amazing how they start finding these common things with us. But if we're not, then they don't, and they'll find someone else who's more verbal and vocal, which would be the conservative side or the right, radical right, not just conservative. I don't mean it that way, but it's just easier to leave that side, and that's just my sense of it.
Well, I just want to say one thing that has given me some hope recently is the economic issues, I think, do resonate with a lot of people. And I'll just give you an example I heard about. In Minnesota, there was the Minnesota, I don't know what it is, Alliance for Progressive something or other, was able to promote and get several laws passed focusing on corporate welfare. And what they found, and also it's been shown to be true in studies around the country, is that issue, people understand that issue, and it really resonates with people across, all kinds of divisions. So I think that, that probably is a place to start, and that's another reason why the religious right has been so successful, because people really are living in a lot of fear right now because of the economy. Because of the economy, fear, financial fear. And the religious right, I think, offers really simple solutions, and that's, I think often on the left we talk very much in textures and complexities that aren't as easily grasped. So,
the corporate welfare thing, I absolutely, in terms of taking that approach among others is one that I certainly, buy into a lot. What's this corporate welfare deal going on now between New World Mine and Plum Creek, and all of a sudden we're supposed to be selling off the state national forest to pay somebody to stay out of our country? To stay out of, down there by Yellowstone? It's ridiculous. But somehow the media presents it as logical possibilities. So yes, anyway, corporate welfare. If people understand it, they read it, they get it. Even things like the which is a little bit different, but like the buffalo slaughter. I think most people in this state are upset by that, but it's out of their hands, right? So what do you do? The one guy says this, and the president's going to do this, and Moscow says that, and Yellowstone Park says that. So they don't know what to do.
Okay, so we've identified that people are looking for leadership and looking for solutions that resonate.
But I do think there's a split. Go ahead.
Your turn.
There is quite a split, though, I think, between social issues and the economic issues. We keep saying that we all have the economic in common, and I don't know if maybe I'm just alone in this, but I don't know enough to feel strongly to want to act economically. What I came here concerned about, and what I think a lot of people may have in common, are the social issues of making sure the government is not involved in saying that being gay or lesbian is illegal, or in a woman's choice and a late-term abortion, that sort of thing.
I think we're all, in general, upset about what is happening with our resources, who's taking them, who's using them. I'm married. My dear wife has 2 black children. We have struggled over this. I believe that's the entire purpose of this meeting. About our rights, about our civil rights in our United States. That's all I have to say.
I think, Pam, that it's the government on our backs or off our backs, is an issue that can divide us. What we don't want to do is to get into that argument, because we know that the government was important in intervening in the 1960s to keep blacks from being murdered. Without the federal intervention, states like Alabama and Mississippi would have plowed those civil rights workers under 10 feet of earth, and they would never have been found. And they didn't care. At the same time, we don't want the federal government in our bedrooms. The issue is one of equality. You want to be treated equally. Gays and lesbians want to be treated equally with heterosexuals. Blacks want to be treated equally with whites. Working people want to be treated equally with corporate tycoons. That's our issue, is equality. And certainly we have to find ways, as you were saying, to bring about redistribution of wealth, to bring about equality in all of these realms. We have to have practical policies. But to me, that's the sine qua non of our existence. Without a rough measure of equality, you can't have complete equality in anything. We're all a little different. But we've got to have that fundamental equality, or we don't have freedom, we don't have control, we don't have democracy.
But I think there's another element here too that we need to be aware of, and I think that has something to do with just going to use the word intelligence, leadership capacity, the ability to use one's imagination. We're not equal. Will never be. That can never be a part of total culture. There are persons who are much more intelligent, much more imaginative than I am. And yet, I'm willing to tackle all kinds of issues. And I think that's the value of community. And I really get upset when we begin talking about the left and the right and they and us and that kind of mindset. I was responding to your concern about not having a home, and the way to do this is go to the legislature, and request, forests so that you can build your homes. And it's going to be a no-win situation because it's not going to happen. And you're going to go home thinking somehow that the government is not working for you. I'm positively convinced that there is enough imagination in a group such as we have here to do what it is you desire to have done. And somehow, out of the resources of a community, we can find leaders. And we can use our imaginations. And we can approach corporate America. And we can do all kinds of things in order to make happen what you want to happen. I don't think that it's a matter of our saying, let's get everything together and go to the legislature and come up with a program and have them pass it or not pass it. I think more and more I feel that's almost the place of last resort. Do everything we possibly can before ever doing that. And only as that becomes just a positive, we somehow just need their okay before moving ahead, then I think all the work that has been done prior to that will almost make it happen at the state level. I just feel so strongly about Missoula, and I've only been here 2.5 years. This is a community that works. It really does. And I don't think of this community as a leftist community or a liberal community or a conservative community. Obviously, there's a tremendous mix here. But man, there are some creative people here, and there are some strong leaders, and there are people who are hurting. And yet there are a lot of people out there who are willing to help. And somehow to bring these persons together, and I think to deal with specific issues, whether it's homes for the homeless, or whether it's alternative forms of sentencing, or whatever the issue might be, I think that there are resourceful people who can deal with this in responsible ways and make happen what it is we really want to happen. If we can focus and get the word out.
Well, we're almost out of time, and that's kind of a nice place to end. My own feeling is that maybe we need to do a little bit of all of it, but I also appreciate that that approach. But I sometimes have to remind myself that even though it's great here in Missoula, that maybe there are places in the rest of the state where there's not quite that sense of community, or in our neighboring states and other places. Anyway, so just to end on that note, and if anybody has a last comment that they'd like to make, please feel free. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Because maybe their resource person wasn't one of these ones up here that you really wanted to ask a question to. We'd take some informational kinds of questions, be glad to do that. But I'd also like to know, in your group, was there some kind of something surprising or refreshing or something new that came out that you'd really like to make sure everybody else gets the benefit of? So either that, informational questions or good things about your group that you wanted to talk about. Anyone?
I'll make a statement, although my throat's a little scratchy, but what I was impressed about our group is having March and April, we had quite a diverse group of people with a lot of different interests, but we all had one common thread in basic human rights that, we all need to work together towards.
That's one of the things we wanted to get out of this is sort of how should we frame these issues in a way that pulls them together and draws them together, and I think that basic human rights is one of those. Are there other ways that you came up with in group of ways to frame these issues in a way that's going to make more sense? To average Montanans, not just us, to average Montanans, whomever they are.
I think that with just this meeting tonight with different people from different neighborhoods and different beliefs means a whole lot to me, at least, because you can talk to different people with different beliefs, but it seems to me that in this group here that everyone is concerned with their basic human rights and to be treated well.
Other comments about sort of the idea of these meetings and whether we were able to, take a step in the direction that we talked about wanting to in terms of building a progressive vision.
I don't know, I felt like I would have liked some more answers. I'm not, we had lots of questions, and the whole group seemed to want a lot of answers. I'm not sure how we come up with it.
Don't we all?
Right. But you could feel that people wanted the answers, which is also refreshing. That's good.
Well, it feels really great to me to have all this good energy together, and I'm wondering how we can build on this and continue it. Somebody at the very end of our group mentioned maybe the alternative of instead of focusing so much on the legislature to come together more as a community and what can we offer each other. And so I guess I'm interested in how we do that. Missoula is probably a great place to start.
Absolutely. Ideas for how to sort of continue this and the community conversation, I guess?
I'll just add, I guess one thought that keeps coming back to me is just educating ourselves, educating others about issues, how they interconnect, economic issues, maybe. And so, I don't know, I wonder if people are interested in that kind of an ongoing discussion. What if we had community conversations periodically?
What do you think? We got all your names, I hope, and addresses when you came in, and we're certainly willing to make that available to any of you or numerous of you that would like to try to pull at least part of this group or a bigger group than this even together. Assuming all of you agree that your names could go to someone to have sort of a second conversation. Are there other issues that ought to be included in such conversations?
I would like to have a little more discussion, maybe if we do continue to have meetings on the attack on our public schools. That's quite a concern to me, especially from the Flathead, and it's going on quite a bit worse there than here in Hillsborough.
I think I would like to, I'd like to see more time also for strategizing on how to deal with, it's great to have these conversations, but my sense is that we're all, and maybe this is an assumption, but I think that most people here are fairly progressive and believe in human rights, and so, when you have this much energy together, I think it's nice to also have time to come up with strategies and planning for action.
Did any groups come up with some sort of action steps that you think you want to share? I mean, we could have got up here and done the call your legislators, write letters to the editor, and you all kind of know what those things are. And it seems to me that it's kind of hard to get beyond that, but very important to get beyond that.
One thing that came up in our small group is that, that a lot of people knew a little bit about some information, but it's hard to know enough about every single issue. And so, the idea came about, what about if you're a phone tree or something? Or one idea also that we came up with is to ask you after tonight to maybe prepare a one-page sheet of all of the bills that are coming up that we need to take action on, because it is so hard as a citizen to have enough information about every single issue that's important.
I think that's a great idea. Some other groups have suggested, like a website that's just sort of a generic progressive website where people could put on across all these issues, and, so people in the community that do the web thing can pull that down and take it to their group, and not just have, the environmentalists know what's happening with environmental bills, as if the rest of us aren't environmentalists, we all cross these issues, and once again, I think that would be a great idea. Other action steps or things that people think ought to be shared or would like to share with the whole group? Yeah.
I would like to, it's really sort of tangential, but it's human rights in a big way. And there's going to be a march for freedom of Tibet on the 10th of March. And Tibet is sort of become a symbol of the wiping out of a whole people and a country. And the United States is so busy sort of trying to appease the ruling clique in China and therefore to downplay these things. I think that this might be another way of pulling together and saying, listen, we support these people who have really very little.
And where is the rally?
And well, I think it's going to be written up in the paper.
Okay.
And I'd like to invite all of you
Okay, watch the paper
to watch it and to join us. Thank you.
Are there, in that vein, are there other announcements of coming events that we ought to make sure that each other knows about?
I'd like to announce something. I'm Raquel Castellanos with Working for Equality and Economic Liberation. We're a poverty rights group in Montana, and we're having a rally at the Capitol Rotunda. We will provide buses and lunch, and we're inviting people to bring their children. The rally is to send a message to the legislators that they cannot continue to cut social services to the poor, that it's really hurting people, and we're going to have a speak out. There are speakers scheduled, and I've got some handouts here, so if you'd like to grab one, there's a phone number. If you want to sign up for the bus, please contact us. I need your name and phone number because the bus will fill up.
That's March 8th, did you say?
March 8th,
And
at the
that's
Capitol
next?
Rotunda in Helena. And we will also have buses leaving from Bozeman and Butte, so if you have anybody that you know in those communities and you think they might want to go, pass the word along and have them call and sign up for a seat on the bus. Thanks.
And Amy, do you want to see if you can reestablish contact with your petition?
Oh, yeah. Does anybody have the clipboard?
The petition on the civil rights 303, there it is. Okay.
I can make another announcement too. This Friday, the lesbian vendors are having a dance for fun with nothing else involved. So it's going to be at the above the Union Club, and there's going to be dyke cupids for decorations. So it's gonna be really
Just to review the bills that are coming up, and not that all of you can come to these hearings, but when bills are being heard, it's the time to talk to legislators about what you think about them. It's the time also to talk to your neighbors about what you think about them and write letters to the editor. The two bills on civil rights, 299 and 303 that Corky mentioned, were both heard in committee last Friday. They will probably be acted upon tomorrow. They will then likely be on the floor of the House. So this is a good time to bring up those issues.
However, if you call tomorrow to the House Judiciary Committee and say defeated, there is a chance to defeat both of these bills in committee. This is a really crucial point in time to get it out, because I want you to call the members of the House Judiciary Committee, which